Hey y'all, it's Crafty Hope here, and welcome to my You Me Same 3 for October. I'm calling this one Spooky Season Assemblage, and you will see why. Now, You Me Same 3 is from Tiffany of Southern Gals Designs and Michelle of Michelnay, and they started this on their own using the same 3 items, and this year have offered up kits for other artists to participate. So this time around, we have a little chipboard, is that what it's called? Laser cut star and a button and a rusty safety pin. So those are the 3 items, and I decided pretty quickly that I didn't like the button and that star the way they are, and that I wanted to alter them. So I'm starting with what is that? Black gesso, just to as a jumping off point. I will alter the star more, but the button's pretty much just, I'm turning it black. I wasn't digging that um, faux tortoiseshell brown button thing going on. So I wanted it a little different. I kind of felt when I saw that star, I was getting a whole Halloweeny spooky season vibe. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I played with so many ideas for this. And finally just settled on something that I'm really enjoying. So, I have those 2 painted. I had decided that to go with that rusty safety pin, I would do a rust effect on the wooden star. So, I'm using it's Prima Marketing Finnabair rust paste, or rust effects paste. And so it's 3 little containers of different colored paste. There's a brown one which has got some super coarse material in it. Then there's an orange one that's a little less coarse, and then a yellow one that's the least coarse. So they're texture pastes and colored so that in the end it'll look like rust. And it does a pretty good job depending on how you apply it and all of that. I am using a palette knife, and you see I could have used a toothpick, but what was handy on my desk was a mechanical pencil, so I'm using that to fish out some of the paste that's getting inside that star. And I tested a lot of these things out before I did them. Like, I played with, because I've used this rust paste before, but never really had a lot of success getting things to look rusty. So I used like a Scrabble tile and tested it, and it turned out beautifully. And I found that what really worked to make it look the best was to just let it dry. Leave it for a while and come back to it, and you'll see the rusty bit. So, and don't put too much of one thing. So, especially as you add the layers, like less orange than you put brown and less yellow than you put orange really works well. And I think for some reason, I'm thinking Michelle has a tutorial on making your own rust paste. I could be wrong, but I may go look on her channel and see if I can find that. So you don't have to go buy that Finnabair stuff if you don't want to. All right. The next thing is I have this wood plank. This is from the Dollar Tree. I think it's like a pack of 6 or 8 of them. I'm trying to remember what size they are. They are 7 inches by almost 3 inches, like 2.5, 2 3/4, somewhere in there. And I had started with, I don't know if you can see the white paper on the bottom there. I had started with that in a square one and was playing with some Tim Holtz paper dolls and thought I was going to use that. And the more I played with it, the more frustrated I got. And so I finally had to step away and decide I really just need to do something simple um and just use those 3 items and do something that made me happy. So that's what I'm doing. I'm starting by painting this black. It really doesn't matter in the end, except that the back is black. But I wanted a base. I didn't want to work on top of that raw wood. I wanted to make sure like the edges and the back and everything also had a nice coat of gesso. So I'm just using that black gesso and coating it all. And I left this in here. I mean, I understand y'all know how to coat something, but I wanted to give myself a little bit more time in here if I needed it to explain anything. So I do apologize for a 25-minute long video. I know that's super long. I try to keep them under 10 minutes, but this one just kind of got away from me. And like I said, I even simplified this. So, and this is sped up and everything, but it didn't feel like it took as long as it did apparently. All right, so I'm finishing that up with a nice coat of that. I'm going to put it off to the side to dry and work on the next thing, which is, I think I have I'm trying to remember what the next thing I did was. Yes, I have a piece of dictionary paper. And this is just an old dictionary. I think I even went and tore out the page that the word witch is on. So it would have some kind of magic and witchy words in the background. And I am going to play with several distress inks and oxides here. I'm starting with Walnut Stain Distress ink. And as you saw, I've got a nonstick craft sheet and just kind of blotted that ink pad onto the craft sheet and sprayed it with a little water, moved it around a little bit. And about here is where I realize that my paper is not as wide as my board. And so, at least because I wanted to make that board horizontal, and I realized, oh no, I'm going to have to do some cutting and pasting here, but we'll get to that. So, this is tea dye distress ink, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. Blot it on my nonstick craft sheet, spray it with some water, move it around with the wet paintbrush, and then just kind of gently pick up some of the colors. And I'll dry that, wipe that up off my craft sheet and dry it. So I'm drying between some of these layers just to kind of make sure. I know the distress products will all move, but yeah, I wanted to just make sure some of it was dry. Here I'm using a Distress Oxide spray in Vintage Photo, and I'm going to spray that down and I'm going to leave it wet for the next step. So what I'm using, this is going to be weird. It is Twisted Citron Distress Oxide that looks super bright and super, but when it goes on this page with this brown and the little bit of wet, when it dries, it is this, I don't even know how to describe it. It's not that super bright color. It tones itself down and it adds just a little bit of I don't know. I kind of wanted it to feel like moss in there. And then that is a distress crayon in peeled paint, and I'm going to just scrub it on my I'm using all the Tim Holtz products in this shawl. So many Tim Holtz products. Uh yeah. So I just scrubbed that on there, and again, I didn't dry anything till the end, and I have this lovely splotty paper. And so I'm trying to line it up and figure out what I want to do. I was trying to make sure that where the witchy words were would end up on the board. So I kind of eyeballed it, and then I'm cutting across, and that wasn't straight, so I'm going to straighten it up. And I thought I was going to use the piece that I cut off the bottom, but I quickly realized I didn't cut it tall enough. Yeah, so that's not going to work. So I'm going to flip this over and tear it. You see, I leave a little bit extra down at the bottom just to make sure I have, I don't cut that too short basically. And then I want to match those up, but I realized that right there on the edge where the words which and where the root words are is so super dark, and I'm going to have to tear that off. So as I'm looking at that, because I want this to feel a little more seamless, so I'm going to go ahead and tear that off and watch what happens here. Y'all, look. Like, you can barely even tell. That made me so happy. I'm going to use some matte Mod Podge there to glue all this down. I've grabbed just a basic paintbrush. I think it's a super cheapo one. Not sure, Dollar Tree or one of those multi-packs of paintbrushes. And I'm going to start with the excess, that extra piece that I'm putting on there, because I want to make sure I layer over the part that has the witchy definitions on it. So I'm going to put this piece down first, and I don't need much of it, so I'm trying not to, because any of that paper I can save and use for something else later, which is awesome. And I'm trying to figure out about where I need more Mod Podge to go. So I'm putting that down. And y'all, I end up putting far too much Mod Podge here. So I'm going to, you're going to see in a minute that I'm going to try to blot it off a little bit. I'm picking it with my paintbrush and yeah, blotting off in a napkin. And you can see why I'm not going over the top of this with the Mod Podge, because all of those distress products will move. And I really liked the effect I had going on there, and I didn't want it to move a whole lot. I wanted that splotchy goodness. All right, so I've got my papers down, and I'm going to flip over my board there and start pulling off the excess. I really like the torn edges. I'm folding it a little just to make sure it tears a little evenly. Yeah, and get that excess off. And I'm going to put it aside to dry for a minute. I think that's what I'm going to do. Yeah, well, I'm going to cut off that little bit there. Okay, so I'm going to put that aside to dry before I go on to working with that some more, and I'm going to show you I'm pulling out my elements. I had gathered a couple things, so I've got my star that I've rusted, and my button that I've made black, and then my rusty what do you want to call paper clip clothespin. And I've gathered a couple other things. I've got this tiny jar and this weird little weed that I'm going to stick in the jar. There's some skeleton leaves and petals, a Tim Holtz like charm, that's the cameo thing, and a piece of coral. And so I'm going to use all of those little things to make this fun little creepy collection. So I'm going to start with my jar, and I'm sticking my little weed head in there. And this is just a piece of aluminum like duct tape that I've seen it used in many crafts. It's from the hardware store, and I've cut a little strip of it there. You see, I cut a couple different pieces until I finally decided this was going to be the easiest thing, was to cut a little strip and just go around it like I would if I was soldering it. For me, that's what it means, and then I'm just pressing the excess there in, and I don't really like the way the top of that is looking, so I'm going to take another little piece here and stick that over that top edge so I don't have that, I don't know where it gathered. I don't like all of that so much, and it doesn't really matter because where I put this, because that aluminum tape kind of picks up texture. And then I didn't want it super shiny. So what I have grabbed is a Sharpie. And y'all, I am just rubbing that Sharpie over that silvery foil and then rubbing it off with my finger. And it's going to leave like a little bit of a darkening on it. And if you didn't want to use your finger to do something like this, you can totally just grab a napkin or a Q-tip or something like that. But work fast, work in small sections. Because if you try to do the whole thing and then wipe, that Sharpie may dry black. And so I'm just going over that. Y'all, I don't mind my messy fingers. To me, I didn't art if I didn't get my fingers messy. So I'm getting that about where I like it. I'm finding as I'm rubbing it that there's some really pokey edges where I'd folded it and all of that. So I'm going to take this here in just a second there and rub it on my surface just to kind of flatten all that down, because like aluminum foil, this tape is pretty malleable. All right, so I'm done with that. Well, I'm not done with that. I decided I needed a little label on that jar just to give it a little more interest. And I'm taking that same dictionary page that we altered and get the page number off. It's got all that ink and goodness on there, so I've just torn around it where I think it's 1679 is the number that's on there, and I'm using my Mod Podge just to glue that straight onto the front of that jar, just to give it kind of like a specimen, or I don't know, like something you'd find in a laboratory. So there, perfect. And that little jar, y'all, is it contained a bunch of little beads in it, and that was for nails I found at the Dollar Tree also. All right, so now I've got the skeleton leaf that I found out in my backyard, and I needed to alter it. I didn't think it would stand out enough on what I'm going to do here, so I wanted to make it kind of green to kind of echo that green that was splattered on there. And so I used Distress Stain in peeled paint, and then I've also got, I think that's either Walnut Stain or Vintage Photo, also the Distress Stain, to give it just a couple of blots of brown. Make it feel a little like it's changing colors. All right, and I'm going to dry that and then grab my Mod Podge again and just lightly, lightly, lightly with a fairly soft brush go over that skeleton leaf. I'm doing this for a couple reasons. One, to seal in the distress stain, and for the other thing, to kind of hopefully keep that skeleton leaf from decaying or whatever it is it's going to do a bit more. So I'd like to keep this as fresh as possible, as long as possible. Now I'm taking off the excess from the paper from the board now that it's dried a little bit, just using a bit of a sanding block on like the really kind of finest side of the sanding block. And some of that I'm just peeling off, and I cut some of this out because I went out of frame for most of it. But yeah, I went around all the edges and got that excess off. And now for the Crackle Paste, y'all. This is the Deco Art Media Crackle Paste. My jar, I have let it become far too precious, and it's getting thick. So I don't know, I need some new Crackle Paste. But for now, this is what I'm doing. I am using a palette knife to lay down a thin layer of Crackle Paste. I'm not using a super thick one, but I'm laying down a thin layer and then kind of just spreading it out with my finger. And I'm just doing this around the edges because I just kind of wanted to frame up this board with the crackle. And because I did not seal any of that Distress Oxides and Distress inks underneath, that's going to seep into some of that Crackle Paste. That it's kind of yummy. It kind of works beautifully that it kind of goes up in there. If you don't want that, definitely seal your distress sprays, distress products in some way, because they will go into your other medium. But I'm trying to give this kind of an organic feel, spreading it out like that. And again, I don't mind using my finger, but if you do, you could put on some gloves or something like that. So, if you don't know, and I'm putting it aside to dry because Crackle does best if you leave it to dry. So I'm going to let it sit aside and do its Crackle thing while I do this next thing, which is use the silver DMC embroidery floss, which really wants to fray. I was going to thread it, but I decided it would be just as easy to do what I wanted to do without putting it on a needle. So I'm using a little bit of my glue stick to kind of make this silvery floss wants to fray really easy. And what I want to do is add just a touch of silver onto my button, give it a little added interest, also have some kind of like fiber element to it, dress it up a little. So I am just weaving it through the holes there, kind of so it looks like it's sewn on, but I'm going to tie it in the front on the top again, so it has that fibery, textury element. And I wanted something else silver on here because both that cameo charm and my little specimen jar have like silver tones in them. So I wanted to add just another touch of something with that bit of shine to it. So I decided to use this fun floss. All right, so I've got it woven the way I want, and I'm just going to tie a couple of knots and then trim it kind of even. See, I'm pulling it up straight. And then I'm going to like actually fray it on purpose. And I think this for some reason only has like 3 strands on each of it, but it's beautifully silver. So my crackle is done crackling. I don't know if you can see that, and you can see how it's got a little bit of color to it from those distress products underneath. But I'm going to add to that. I have, what are those two? That is, I believe peeled paint. I've used a lot of peeled paint and walnut stain. Those have been my like go-to colors for this board, other than that twisted citron and that little bit of tea dye that we splashed on there. Oh, and we used some vintage photo. Anyway, but these two are walnut stain and peeled paint, which have been my pretty consistent colors on here. And I am just taking those distress crayons and rubbing them over the crackle, and as you can see, kind of using it like a pastel and blending that color out using my finger. I will, in a couple places, break out a wet paintbrush and just kind of force it into those cracks a little bit more, but it does fine just with this method of kind of rubbing it in. And it does a great job showing those crackles. When you get bigger crackles when you use like a thicker amount of crackle, and smaller cracks when you use a thinner one. And for this, I really thought it was fine to have smaller cracks because this is a small, just a little tiny little art element for our spooky season. Now, and again, y'all, when I saw those things, I wanted to have something kind of Halloween-y, and this reveals the day before Halloween, so I thought it all kind of would just perfect. So that's, it's all gonna fall together awesomely. I hope you enjoy this. I love little collections like this, y'all. I go out and I collect things in my yard all the time. I don't know. I call myself a pickup artist because I love to go out and find little things and pick them up, and I've got them laying all over the house, feathers and leaves and flower petals and nests and butterfly wings, and all of that stuff is all over my house. All right, so that is a little piece of, it is a flour sack towel from the Dollar Tree. So it's a bit thinner than a normal flour sack towel would be, but it's more, I don't know, more of a weave than a cheesecloth would be. My goodness, I could not find the words. So I'm using some matte gel medium to adhere that down, and again, that distress stuff underneath is going to activate and kind of stain my flour sack towel a little bit, but that's fine. It gives it kind of a rusty feel to it with the colors that come through, and I'm okay with that. Now I am arranging these elements. I'm trying to get, so that like the greens aren't too close to each other and the things with silver are evenly spaced out. And I put that specimen jar in the very center. I measured this out, and that's the 3.5 mark. And from there, I'm kind of spacing everything else out evenly to make my little collection here. And I've got this little container of, I love these little things of E6000. And I'm just going to use that to stick down each of these things. Each of our little collected spooky cool things. And I love, y'all, I went out specifically to find, and I thought an acorn cap. I wanted something else natural on here, and I was thinking I wanted an acorn cap, but then it hit me that I could use a skeleton leaf, and I thought that worked perfect for like the spooky season because it's a skeleton leaf, and I've got that like skeleton cameo on there, and oh yeah, I was totally digging that. So I am going through and getting these down. I think I had to come back in later and add a little extra glue on that specimen jar. I didn't put a whole lot on, and the rounded surface of it makes it kind of not want to stick. So all right, so I've got those things, and then the other thing that I have is it's a quote chip. It's from the Halloween collection a couple years ago from Tim Holtz. So it's a black quote chip, and it says, oh, what is it? I should have that right here. Oh, I don't. Collector of curiosities, and I thought that was perfect for this. There were quite a few of them that I thought, any of these could work, like it's found objects or something like that. But I really like this. So I'm going to stick that down also with my E6000 because these quote chips are kind of heavy. And then I'm going to leave these to dry for a little bit. And then I'm going to go, and I've got a binder clip type thing that I had rusted previously. And y'all, I'm just going to stick that on the top. And it is perfect to use for hanging on the wall. And I think I've got a picture here at the end of it hanging. And I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, let me know below. Make sure you go watch Michelle and Tiffany's videos. Let me know if you have any questions, and keep on crafting on. Thanks for watching. Bye.